video is for education and entertainment purposes only. Please consult with your healthcare provider before making any changes to your health plan.
Hey, beautiful soul. It's Jacqueline from the Labia Chronicles, where I talk about all things lichen sclerosus. So if you're looking to empower yourself with information, find acceptance, and reclaim your life, then please subscribe to this channel and keep on watching. And for those of you that are newer to this channel, just a little heads up, all of my new content is now being housed on Lichen Sclerosus Support Network's channel. So all of my videos from 2023 on are going to be found over there. I will leave that linked in the description box below. And then this channel is just kind of staying open. I'm going to bring on guests and have some great conversations. So definitely keep checking back and seeing what's new over here. Now, as you can tell, I have a guest today, and I am very excited to bring Jen on. And we are going to be talking all about trauma and lichen sclerosus today. And this has been something that Jen and I have had in the works for over 2 years. We have been emailing and having conversations and thinking and brainstorming. So I think we're both really excited to finally be doing this video. So let's start with some quick introductions. My name is Jacqueline, and I'm the founder of the Labia Chronicles, which is a content hub for lichen sclerosus information and support. I do blogs, I do ebooks, webinars, community outreach. So much can be found on my website, losslabia.com. And I myself have lichen sclerosus. I had symptoms since I was 20. Now it'll be about 4 years since I've been in remission with no symptoms and no complications. I'm going to knock on wood.
Yeah.
That continues. But that's me in a nutshell. You can watch my diagnosis story if you want to learn more about me. I have my diagnosis story. I'll pop it up there. But Jen, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and maybe just give us your diagnosis story in a nutshell. Of course, I always say in a nutshell because lichen sclerosus diagnosis stories are quite long and complex, right? Well, let's just do a little kind of brief overview.
Yeah. Well, yeah, thanks for inviting me for the conversation. And I know that a lot of listeners are going to hear parts of their own story reflected in what we talk about. And so I'm looking forward to hearing how the conversation touches people's lives and gives a new perspective and maybe some hope. So I'm Jen. Nice to meet everybody. I'm a psychologist. Maybe I'll share more about my specialty and work toward the end. I was diagnosed in my mid-30s, and that was after a couple of years of having symptoms. And when I was diagnosed, the doctor, I live in Switzerland, so I was in the French-speaking part of Switzerland at that time, and the doctor told me in French, you just have a little, une petite maladie de la peau. You just have a tiny skin illness.
Mm-hmm.
And he didn't really say what it was, and he just said, oh, here's some cream, you put it on. And I thought, I'd had other things that you just put cream and it's gone, and then you never think about it again. So I didn't go digging. And so I used the cream as he said, and it totally went away. And I thought, okay, good. Whatever that was, I'm glad it's gone. And then the symptoms started coming back and morphing and changing. And I went back. Well, first I did Google, crazy, right? Like, what could this be? What could this be? And then I printed out 2 possibilities, and one of them was lichen sclerosus. And I took them to him and I said, I think I have something serious. It's one of these? And he said, yeah, it's this one. Kind of like I told you last time. And I was like,
no.
No. And if I had understood, I wouldn't have let the symptoms get to where they were. They had gotten quite bad. And so then I thought, well, there's got to be some psychological element to this. I had been through a fair amount of trauma, like recently to when I was diagnosed. And I thought it wouldn't be surprising to me. I mean, my body has manifested all kinds of stress and trauma throughout my life. And I was always very aware of that, even as a kid. I always would get a stomach ache or whatever when I would be stressed out. So I had a really clear sense that this could be related to a lot of the things that I was going through. And so I started looking around, and I saw kind of some mention of sexual abuse, but it was like sexual abuse being related to lichen sclerosus. But, it was kind of mentioned briefly, like in the literature about children, about kids getting lichen sclerosus. It was like, it could happen like immediately after. And then, but it, didn't mention what about, 20, 30 years later, Or what about adults in general and
Yeah.
sexual abuse? And so I thought, well, they mention it, even if it's not in the full scope. And I wonder for myself, like what kind of link is there? So I started doing a ton of research, um, and even though my doctor didn't have any kind of interest in the
Mm.
psychosomatic elements
Yeah.
of illness, I just let myself continue to explore and explore. And that led to a long remission. And then I had some additional stresses come up, and it came back, or, I had a
Yeah.
flare. And then it's been, variable over the years. Um, but I've learned a lot about myself over the years and what would have led to this part of my body expressing something in this way. And
Mm.
that's led to a lot of healing on many levels. I would say psycho-spiritual for sure, and then physical. And so, I mean, now you would never know that I had had something. From the outside, you would never know,
Yeah.
which is miraculous because, typically they say once you have architectural changes, that's the LS
Mhm.
lingo that most people
Yeah.
listening probably know, it'll never go back. The scarring can't go back. If
Mhm.
you lose some labia, it'll never come back, and all of that. Well, I can say in my case, that's absolutely not been true.
Mm.
And so I think there's a lot that we don't yet know that Western medicine is not aware of. And so that's why I've been exploring this stuff and why we've been talking about it.
Yeah, well, that's fantastic, and thank you so much for sharing a little bit about, your diagnosis and what came up. I think it's so fascinating that you mentioned, sexual abuse and trauma, that was your instinct right away. Is there something there? And talking about, what does the scientific literature say about this? And to your point, not much, right? So when it is mentioned, it's really a passing thought. So, in more recent publications, they list trauma as a potential risk factor. So, risk factor is just meaning, it increases your likelihood of something happening. So, in the context of lichen sclerosus and trauma, it would be if I experienced trauma, that's a risk factor. That trauma makes me maybe a little bit more predisposed or a little bit more likely to develop lichen sclerosus, but it's not a guaranteed connection, right? Because there's a lot of people that have experienced trauma and they don't have LS. So it's not, as straightforward as that. We as human beings, mind, body, soul, are incredibly complex. It's very rare that there are these clear connections across the board. But it is starting to get mentioned in papers, and I'm grateful for that. And I'm hoping that conversations like these are going to spark more research on this particular topic because I think there's so much here.
Yeah.
I really, really do. And I think that, our listeners are going to start to feel that as well as we kind of move through this conversation. So one thing I want to kind of start with is the question of what is trauma. And the reason I want to ask this is because for the longest time, I held such a narrow definition, understanding of what trauma meant. And as I've moved through, my journey, that definition, that understanding of what trauma means has broadened and broadened and broadened. And I think it's important that we have that conversation because I think a lot of people self-dismiss their own trauma because it doesn't fit this very small, neat package of what we think trauma is. And so we often, dismiss ourselves. We often gaslight ourselves. This doesn't happen. It's not traumatic enough. So
Yep.
let's kind of start with, how do we understand trauma when we're having this conversation? What are we meaning by it?
Yeah. Well, this is something I run into all the time. And also, I was one of the people dismissing the severity of my own trauma as well
Yeah.
through the years. When I trained as a psychologist, I remember I had to write a little mini autobiography, kind of,
Mm.
psychological autobiography. And I just put everything in this neat little package. Like I was raised with all of these dysfunctions, but now I've I've understood that I'm not at fault, and
Mhm.
basically the rest of my life is going to be grand because I figured that out. And I look, I've read that paper in more recent years, and I just, it's sweet, but
Yeah.
very misinformed. And when I trained as a psychologist in between 20, no, 2001 and 2003, well, 1998 to 2003. So basically, nobody was talking about trauma in the way that we know
Mm.
it now. And
Right.
even when I was diagnosed, most people in the regular, like Western psychological space or Western psychiatric space weren't really talking about trauma in the way that we are now and since the last
Mhm.
decade. And so I was to even look into how trauma could be related to the body. I was going back into old stuff, like anybody who's listening who might know Alexander Lowen and the Reichian
Yeah.
school, which is about body psychotherapy.
Mhm.
And that's what I was like. I was reading all this stuff, during that period where I was going, this has to be connected. I'm sure that this is
Yeah.
connected. And so what we're understanding since about 10 years ago, more and more, is that trauma isn't exactly what happens to us, because like you were saying, one person can have something terrible happen to them and they don't get
Mhm.
LS, and then another
Right.
person can have something terrible to them and they do get LS. And
Mhm.
so you can't say, well, everybody who, for example, has sexual abuse will get LS. It's kind of more about what is our system able to handle when bad things happen to us, and what
Mhm.
kind of social support do we have. And if our system is unable to handle what's coming in and we don't have the social support to process it, that's when it really becomes a traumatic reaction. And as long as we don't have the skills, as long as we don't learn the skills to handle that ourselves, and a lot of that comes through having the social support to help
Sure.
us to learn to have the skills to handle that ourselves, and just to help us carry the load, you know, then we don't process it and it gets stuck somewhere,
Mhm.
and it becomes, it's like the belief that we have about ourselves. Then something happens to us. So let's say, like, I believe I'm not worthy. Then something happens to me that overwhelms my system. I translate that through I'm not worthy. And then I just continue to believe that, and my body continues to express I'm not worthy. I mean, the simplest level we can see on the body is like, I'm not worthy. If anybody thinks of what shame feels like, um, I mean, we
Mm.
all know what
Yeah.
that feels like. We close in on ourselves, just as a
Mhm.
very simple example.
Yeah.
And so our thoughts really affect the body. And then when things happen and we are overwhelmed by them, and they reinforce beliefs that we already hold, or they help us create new beliefs that are detrimental to the body, then they stay with us, and they continue. The thing that's, I think, probably, I'm hoping that psychologists and psychiatrists will talk more about in the coming years, is how, and this is already shifting. I can see it clearly. But what I do hope people will talk more about is that those defenses are really, um, they're protectors. Like,
Mhm.
there's usually a reason that we feel like we have to hold beliefs like I'm not worthy,
Right.
because if we would just show up in our full self at that moment, it might not be socially safe for us.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so there's always this delicate moment in adulthood when we're having to, we see, okay, wait, I'm no longer like living with my family, or I'm no longer in that situation that was making me feel unsafe. And so maybe I need to like update these beliefs. And then it updates, of course, how we feel in our body. And so if you're able to update that belief, then you stand up stronger, and you're
Mhm.
not feeling like I'm not worthy. Instead, you're feeling like, you know what, I am worthy. I'm not perfect, but I'm worthy. And so the body also shifts. And when we can kind of understand that our reactions to trauma protected us, then we start to feel we start to feel more grateful that
Yeah.
those things happened. So for myself, as it relates to LS, I felt very much like a victim at the beginning. I
Yeah.
was like, this is awful. Like, here were some of my beliefs. I'm like being punished for some reason that I don't understand,
Mhm.
you know. Um, and we'll probably get into that, comes from way earlier in my life, that did not
Yeah.
start when I was in my 30s. And now I don't feel like a victim of it. I feel like my body was protecting me, and my thoughts were protecting me, and that was my trauma reaction. And it sucked most of the time.
Mhm.
But at the
Yeah.
same time, I really appreciate it because it kept some part of my essence really safe when it wouldn't have been safe, if I would have shared it on the outside. And so a
Mhm.
lot of my healing has just been about learning how to welcome those fragmented parts back and appreciate the parts that were protecting them while they weren't safe. So that
Mhm.
might sound kind of abstract for some listeners, but bear with us. Maybe by the end, it'll be a little clearer. And even if it's not, we'll give places that you can go learn more because there's now tons of resources available on this, and so
Mhm.
it's no longer secret information. And
Right.
thankfully, the internet allows us to not have to wait or have enough money to go to a psychologist to learn this stuff.
Yes,
Right?
yes, because that can be quite pricey. And again, it just comes back to, human beings, we are complex.
Yeah.
And listening to this conversation, you may need to listen to it over and over again. That's okay. This may not be the time for you to
Yeah.
hear this. You may not be ready to hear what we're discussing yet. All these things are totally okay.
Yeah.
You engage in this conversation to the extent that you can and in a way that is supportive and helpful for you. Um, so always honor yourself in this. And yeah, it can be abstract. It can be quite challenging in the beginning, but the more we work with it, I think the more it becomes clearer and clearer to us. I didn't have the same trajectory as you did in terms of your healing journey, but I did also do a lot of psychological inner spiritual work as well. And that's the other thing too that I hope comes out of this conversation is that healing is going to look different for all
Yeah.
of us. But I think at the heart of it really is this curiosity.
Yes.
Curiosity, I think, is going to be the one of the big themes that I want us to really keep coming back to, because even just listening to your story, I'm thinking how incredibly curious you were, like in introspectively looking inward. And okay, my reaction of I feel like a victim, and where is this coming from, and what came up around my trauma, and how did my body or my me protect itself in all of this. I find it really interesting because one thing that really came up for me was there's this stuckness that seems to happen or can happen afterwards when our system is overloaded and when we don't have that support system in place, when we don't have the tools at our disposal to learn what to do. It seems like it just gets stuck in the body and in our minds. Is that accurate to say that a trauma response can lead to this kind of stuckness in the body?
Yeah, that's a good way to say it. And you said in the body and mind, and
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that's the case. The Bessel van der Kolk, he's like kind of one of the main guys who really legitimized the idea of trauma being more than just like war veterans having
Mm-hmm.
PTSD. And he does a really good job of laying out the what's going on in the brain. And
Yeah.
there's one thing that he says that I think is worth mentioning here is that when we get in trauma, like the kind of the trauma reactions, I should say, are the frontal cortex is kind of offline
Mm-hmm.
to some extent, and so it's like relying on these areas that they don't really process what happened as in like past, present, and future. And so when you're stuck in trauma, the idea is you're stuck in a perpetual present where the trauma
Mm,
is still happening, even if the actual event is over. So like
right,
in sexual abuse, for example, if when that's happening, of course, the physical event ends, but you still feel scared, you still feel invaded, you still feel all the things that a person might feel. I mean, not everybody will feel that
right.
if they can process
Mhm,
it and they're safe enough and stuff. But if they're processing it alone, then they end up and they don't have the support, then they may end up kind of being stuck in an eternal present where it's not something that happened to me in the past and I've learned to live with
right.
it, or that I've transmuted it in my own understanding. And some people say that the hardest things that happen to them, they're grateful because it awoke different things in them: empathy, compassion, the will to live, some kind of inner strength that it unlocks. And, when you're in that eternal present of suffering, it doesn't, it doesn't feel
Hmm.
like that. It's like,
No.
yeah. And I mean, and it's worth saying, you can be a totally functional person and have
Yeah.
like one little bit of trauma that's looping around where you're stuck in eternal present. It's not like a black and white thing where if you have trauma, you're like falling apart and you can't do your life. I mean, I've built a huge organization in all these
Hmm.
years that I've been sick.
Yeah.
I've been functioning in many ways
Hmm.
quite fine. But there was definitely a part of me that was like, yeah, stuck in the loop, stuck out of,
Yeah.
there was no sense of past, present, and future. There was just the sense of suffering, the suffering present as it related to those issues. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm really glad you brought up that part about, you can be stuck in that present loop, but still function. Because I think that plays into how we sometimes dismiss ourselves.
Exactly.
Because it's like, well, I'm still going to work, I'm still holding a relationship, I'm still going out with friends. Therefore, it must be minimal.
Yeah.
Therefore, it must not really be valid or worthy of, you know, discussion or exploration or healing because I can still do this. You don't have to be stuck in bed, completely unable to do anything for this to be true and valid for you and your body.
Yeah.
So I'm curious to know, let's move this a little bit more in the direction of lichen sclerosus. Um, how do you think that trauma responses can manifest in terms of symptoms and signs of lichen sclerosus? And maybe you can answer that from like a more abstract place, and then how it showed up for you. That
Hmm.
way we have the abstract idea, and then something more concrete that people can kind of relate to.
Yeah. Okay, well, I guess I'll start from kind of one of the healing methodologies that I've explored, which is called German New Medicine. And it's kind of a wild territory, so if anyone goes there, just be warned. But it's quite a different look at the way that the body is functioning and why it's like how it's responding to things.
Mhm.
And so um, I'll just talk about it with relationship to the skin. It has all
Yeah.
different ways to explain what happens to our muscles and what happens to all the different, tissue of the body, um, and even our mental processes. But as it relates to the skin, German medicine says that the epidermis, so the outer layer of the skin, is typically about contact. So I want someone to touch me, or I don't want someone to touch me. And so symptoms related to the skin have to do with wanting or not wanting to be touched. It can be like more abstract and metaphorical, or it can be
Mhm.
like a specific person
Yeah.
or whatever. So already you can start to imagine with the area in question, and with as we're talking about sexual abuse, although again, I'll mention other
Mhm.
things that I've seen from many of the people that I've spoken with this condition. But you can imagine, I mean, anybody that's listening can imagine how this particular area,
Yeah.
may want or not want to be touched. And then the layer down is the dermis. And in German New Medicine, they say that the dermis is sort of responding to attack. So they'll call it an attack conflict or a disfigurement conflict. And we can also imagine in that
This
area.
is this is just blowing my mind right now, but please continue.
I know, right? Like of all the things, I mean, I've studied a lot of stuff and I've had a lot of healing and I've, a lot of approaches and everything. When I discovered this, it was like overnight, everything shifted like
Yeah.
drastically
Yeah, yeah,
because
yeah,
I
yeah,
was like,
yeah.
this is explaining my dilemma in of just two sentences.
Uh-huh, uh-huh. Even just
Uh-huh.
attack conflict, my mind is blown because, at that kind of dermal layer, the cells are literally chaotic and in
Yeah,
conflict and
yeah,
having that kind of attack, this inflammatory attack. So it's just the
yeah.
parallels right now is
I know, right?
wow. Wow.
I know.
Okay, go on, go on.
Yeah, exactly. So then you can imagine, okay, so now I'll say some of the things I've seen. So I've talked to a lot of people who have had sexual abuse, and
Mhm,
so that can be earlier in life or later in life. And oftentimes, those of us who have been sexually abused earlier in life
mhm,
somehow keep repeating it. It might not be as extreme or severe later
mhm.
on, but it's like as if that boundary got broken and we have like a hole in that boundary, and it's just we find that
I see.
it's
Yeah.
almost like easier that it gets broken again,
Mhm.
especially again when it happens to us as children, because we were so vulnerable at that point and didn't know how to. I mean, we didn't our parents are supposed to be our boundaries, right, at that time. So and so another thing I've seen, okay, so I just want to say that for that, then you can think of wanting to be touched or not wanting to be touched, right?
Yeah.
And attack or disfigurement conflicts, right? I
Mhm.
mean, both
Yeah.
apply.
Yeah.
And then there's one that I've gone through personally, which is being raised in a high control religion that
Mm.
has something towards the direction of purity culture. So if listeners are not aware of what that is, purity culture is mostly, I think, an American thing that that's in evangelical fundamentalist religions, where it's hardcore abstinence
Right.
is demanded, it's required, and anything else is uh, sinful, and you're going
And
straight to
yeah.
hell. And the indoctrination level has been highly, highly traumatic for many people who have gone through purity culture. I was shocked and not shocked as I researched and talked to people with LS, how many people had the same story as me.
Yeah.
So I was raised by a Baptist minister. Our world was very, very highly controlled.
Mm.
And as girls going through purity culture, I mean, the boys also struggled in their own ways, but for us girls, the responsibility for men's sexuality, boys' sexuality was put on us. And so there was a lot of suppression of our own awareness of our own sexuality, but like on a physical level as well.
Mhm.
Like we were not really supposed to think about down there,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. Interesting.
So yeah, I mean, can you think about not really wanting to think about down there, and then of course if any sort of self pleasure would come in the question, I mean it was
Yeah.
out of the, according to their doctrine, it was out of the question. But can you think of wanting to be touched, not wanting to be touched, as it relates to that,
Yeah.
so you can see this conflict, and when the conflict is ongoing, the cells are listening and the cells are responding.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And another one that I've seen a lot of is birth trauma. So by birth trauma, I mean like abusive medical practices when you're giving labor, when you're in labor as a mother, so when you're giving birth, and that can be verbal, that can be emotional, that can be physical. The way that they physically treat your body, it's
Yeah.
just kind of feeling unsafe while you're having somebody working in around that area. Um, and so that can also be non-birth related, like through surgeries or other things that
Mhm.
happen, gynecological exams and things that relate to this area. And you can see why somebody would want to not, they would want to not want to be touched in this
Yeah.
area. And so then, like most of us, like I grew up and I left religion and I tried to live like a normal adult existence,
Mhm.
sexually and everything else. And it was so difficult because the years of suppression of that,
Yeah.
I mean, they get in your skin. And like my friend that I grew up with in the religion, we were talking about it
Mhm.
the other day, and we were saying how it's so crazy how after all these years, she's left the religion too. After all these years, we'll still have thoughts come in our head that you know, like if you
Yeah.
think this thought, you're going straight to hell. And then of course I know that that's not, and I'll go like, oh
Mhm.
yeah, there's a blast from the past, right?
Right.
Um,
Right.
but it still happens, and it shows how it's like in there, and that's what I've been the most surprised about, because I thought that's what, like what I was saying before, when I trained as a psychologist, I was like wrote my nice little paper about my life, and I was
Yeah.
like, okay, it's all grand from here because I left. And
Mhm.
my God, I mean, it's been 25 years I'm out, and I still to this day find it in the cells of my body and the way that my body behaves. So my body, expresses this conflict. Do I show up? Do I not show up? Do I allow myself to be seen? Do I not allow myself to be seen? Do I allow
Mhm.
myself to be touched? Do I not allow myself to be touched? And so you can imagine, I mean, after sexual abuse, having that dilemma. So even people who say, well, that happened to me when I was 10,
Yeah.
now I'm an adult. I love my partner. I don't mind, like, I want to be touched and everything. Your body still might have that memory. And so it's literally experiencing a conflict. I want to be touched, but I don't want to be touched. And so what are the cells supposed to do? They're like,
Mhm. Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, I understand their dilemma,
Mhm.
and same thing with
Same.
the birth thing. Like, you could have a birth trauma and then you think, well, I love my partner. Or, even with self-pleasure, like, I want to do this. And then but there might be something in you that's like, I don't want to think about that area. Like, because it brings back those bad,
Yeah.
vibes. Um, and so, yeah, you can kind of start to do the math about why the skin would be expressing such conflicts when those
Mhm.
things occur. And I'm just naming a few, but those are
Yeah.
the few that I've seen that have been the most reported. I haven't had any conversations with men with this condition, and I would really be interested to hear from some and hear
Mm.
about their experiences, because I would think there would be something similar going on,
Yeah.
that somehow maybe they had a procedure there, or they went through purity culture, or they had to suppress their sexuality for some
Mhm.
reason, and that they're um, that this part of them, these cells, actually get that same conflictual message: want to be touched, don't want to be touched. um, and I think it's worth saying that I think for some people it could be just one: I want to be touched, and I'm
Yeah.
not getting what I want. It doesn't have to be both. For me, it was both, but I don't
Right.
think it has to be both. Or I don't want to be touched. Some people,
Mhm.
they're clear: I don't want to be touched, but they're getting touched and they don't want to
Yeah.
be. And
Right.
that's it. So I think, yeah, I mean, I'm giving my version of it, but for anybody listening, you should think about how this could apply to you, and how you're feeling about it. Um,
Mhm.
I will mention as well that according to German medicine, the LS is mostly happening with the epidermis. That's the main thing, but you could have the secondary level in the dermis, which makes total sense.
Mhm.
Um, Especially because the whole diagnosis process and the progression of symptoms can be hugely traumatic, which it was for me.
Yes.
Most women I've talked to have
I
said
would
this
I
was one
would
of the
say
worst traumas.
probably the majority of us,
Yeah,
honestly,
yeah,
would say like yes, yes.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, talk about, I mean, I'm laughing about it, but it's not really funny, but like, talk
Yeah.
about the overwhelm, being alone, not being able to process it. Because, like, here I am, and to your point before, how you were saying, like, everybody goes through their own healing journey, and like,
Mhm.
turn off the video if you're like feeling like overwhelmed by this, because
Yeah,
the video
yeah,
will be
yeah.
there later, and
Yes.
if you want to hear it. And also, maybe some people will go on their whole path without ever considering the trauma question, and they'll figure their way through.
Mhm.
It's not to say like, oh, every person needs to think about
Right.
this,
Right, right,
but
right.
I think one of the main things about the trauma is not being able to talk to anybody
Mhm.
about it, because that, like, I was back then, I wouldn't have talked publicly about it.
Sure. I mean, it's such a taboo. It's so stigmatized, and the number of people that I've spoken to with lichen sclerosis, like there's so many threads that unite us, despite all of our different backgrounds and symptom manifestation and all of this. There are so many commonalities that unite us, and one of those big commonalities is this feeling of isolation, this feeling of shame, this feeling of I can't tell anybody else,
Yeah.
and that is so hard. That is so, so, so incredibly hard to sit with and process the diagnosis and what this means for your future, what this means for your relationship or your potential relationship, and to have to just stifle that and keep it in because we can't talk about our genitals.
Yeah,
That's
exactly. And
that's
even in those
so
moments,
hard.
when you're highly symptomatic, and you're just having the burning or the whatever
Yeah.
itching, and you feel like shit. And then
Hmm.
maybe you say to somebody, I can't attend the meeting or whatever, and they're like, oh, are you okay? What do you have? And through the years, I was like, I can't tell people this. Like, first of all, it feels too private. Like,
Hmm.
it's my private life. And second of all, I can't dump that on them. Like, if I
Right.
told them I had a skin rash on my arms,
Uh-huh.
they don't walk away with any kind of
Yeah.
extra emotional load to carry. I
Yeah.
tell them that I have a condition that affects my genitals, and they're like,
Hmm.
What do I do with this information? It's
Yeah,
too,
a
it's
hundred
too
percent. It
personal.
is. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Yeah.
It's definitely it makes navigating those types of interpersonal relationships incredibly challenging because it's true. It's not just about considering how does this impact us. It's also how is the other person going to receive this. And sometimes I know, oh, this person is safe. This person will receive this well. Versus
Yeah.
sometimes I'm like, oof, am I going to cause them distress
Yeah,
by
exactly.
telling them? I don't know, and I don't always want to be the cause of that. I'm curious to know, and I'm kind of maybe reaching and putting things together that shouldn't. But I'm curious about this conflict piece and the don't touch piece. Is it possible that our symptoms, itch, burning, pain, etc., are kind of there to protect? So, like, let's say I've been through trauma, and I have, by the way. I can relate to every single one minus the purity culture. So I've been through trauma, and I don't want to be touched,
Yeah.
and there's conflict. Um, is it possible that the way to protect against touch is by having, burning? Because if I have burning, I can almost tell my partner, like, oh, we can't have, sexual intimacy today because I'm burning and I can't, is there a way that our symptoms are somehow working to protect us in some strange way?
Oh yeah, I love that you ask because that's the cool part of German new medicine is it changes from not understanding and fearing the symptoms to
Mhm.
going, oh, these are here for a biological purpose. And so the way they describe it is like our bodies are ancient, like they're so old, and our whole
Yeah.
modern way of living, we can't understand a lot of times what the body's doing, but the body has a purpose for whatever it's doing, and it's to protect us. It's to keep the integrity of who we are, right? Like of our physical self. And so in the case of the skin, the epidermis conflict, the idea is there's like a biological program that starts with
Mhm.
this conflict, and then the ultimate aim of this biological process is to thicken the skin. So there will be a reduction of, so
Wow.
it's, I'm going to get some of the technical terms wrong. So if you go study German medicine, then, you'll get a better view of it. I mean, I'm still relatively new to it
Yeah.
in the scope of things, but there's different programs. But for the skin, you have, I can't remember exactly what they call it, but where you're losing cells in the short term so that they will rebuild back stronger. And when you think
Mm.
about the scarification that happens with LS, that's like literally one of the stages of what they call healing. And
Yeah.
so in German new medicine, the idea is that when you're starting to get symptoms, it's actually you're starting to heal. Your body is trying to heal. And the version that your body thinks of as healing is creating thicker skin. And like literally, here you go again, thicker skin. That's
Mhm.
literally what we
The
say.
hallmark of lichen sclerosus.
Yeah, and it's literally what we say when we like on a metaphorical level, like, oh,
Mhm.
I need thicker skin so I
Right,
can
right, right.
handle things, so I can handle conflicts,
Mhm.
so that people don't get to me so easily, and so on. And so
Yeah.
biologically, the system is trying to create thicker skin to protect us from future assaults, from future things, right?
Right.
And I know somebody might say, well, sometimes it's about thinning skin because a lot of times at first,
Mhm.
if there's the thinning
Mhm.
skin, but and I don't know all the ins and outs exactly biologically, but what could be happening is during that thinning phase, that's when the cells are getting destroyed to be rebuilt back
Mm.
thicker.
Mhm. I see.
Um,
Yeah.
and and so yeah, it's doing its job, and yet it's almost like if we could do that job on a psychological level, it would
Mhm.
be mm, easier on our body because our body thinks it's protecting us. And in a sense it is, but because of the way that we're like living our modern life, the way that it is, a lot of times what the body's doing, it makes sense for, you know, an
Yeah.
old an old thing, an old
Mhm.
life that we kind of don't have in our modern reality. So when I realized that, oh, when I'm starting to show symptoms, that's actually when my body thinks that it's going into healing. Then I'm like, okay, this totally changes everything, you know? So the itchy
Yeah.
parts, like the German New Medicine describes that as like when it's starting to get itchy and burn and stuff, that's inflammation, as we know. But you know, healing in the body, healing always happens in a fluid environment when there's inflammation. That's the inflammation.
Yeah.
And so the body's like, okay, we've resolved some conflict about wanting to be touched or not wanting to be touched. Now we create the thicker skin so that the next time that this happens, we're gonna be safer. And I can give an example from my own story. So from the purity culture, there was a lot of pressure, sexual pressure, because purity culture teaches you to be a good Christian wife who never says no to her husband and who always says no for her whole life until she meets her godly husband and they get married. No sex before marriage, of course, no touching before marriage. Then when you get married, then go for it, but only by what your husband wants. Like you shouldn't really think about what you want. I mean, that's the extreme of it.
Sure.
Not every person who went through purity culture got that extreme. I'm just saying the
Gotcha.
most extreme. And even though I was questioning everything since the time I was born, I was not I was not created to be stuck in a religion. That's for sure.
Yeah.
I didn't follow purity culture in the facts, in my acts, but it was so ingrained in me. And also, I think something worth mentioning here is that I've done a lot of work with compassionate inquiry. I've trained in this approach. This is with Gabor Mate, Dr. Gabor Mate,
Yeah.
who's now become quite famous for his work with trauma and the culture and medicine. And he always talks about how there's an autoimmune personality. And the autoimmune personality is the one who's always sweet, always nice, always taking care of everybody, wants to make sure nobody feels bad, and takes way too much on themselves. I know.
You're describing me.
I have literally, with
hit.
the in the LS community, and by now I've met lots and lots of people. I have
Yeah.
never met an exception. I have never met an LS
my
person who's
goodness.
rude, who doesn't think about other people first, no, I mean,
That's incredible. Like with each
yeah, I know,
statement,
right?
I was just like, me, check. Oh Lord. Okay. Wow.
Right? I know,
Yeah.
right? So when you get purity culture and that together, I mean, I was really, I think by nature, I love harmony and I love collaboration and I love love. But also when you're raised as a girl in a super fundamentalist, high control religion, it's all about service. So, you know, and it's all about that men are the ones in charge and God's in charge of men and men are in charge of women. And you should always be servile and all of that. And so then through the purity culture, that message gets extended to the sexual realm. And so even though I was like questioning it the whole time and thinking this is bullshit and everything else,
Yeah.
like I said, it was still in my body. And so like, you know, in my earlier relationships, I would be like unable to assert myself or unable to, would just freeze and just do whatever they want kind of thing. And I had long-term relationships with people in the religion because that was like my world. Those were really my only choices back then.
Yeah, sure.
And so, you know, fast forward to when I met my husband, I remember, you know, in early times when I would say, now's not the right moment. He'd be like, okay.
Yeah.
And he'd like walk away. And here I like to say it's not the right moment. Like I'm practically having a panic attack. Like, am I allowed to have my own thoughts on this matter and not use my body in this way right now? And he'd be like, okay, well, like there's later and we'll just like chill or whatever. No problem. And the thing that I've come to understand is probably my body heard that and felt safe because I remember thinking at that time, what is this? I've never had this, you know? And I think my body was like, oh my God, you have a right not to be touched when you don't want to be touched. And then that's when I got sick. I mean, that's when I started seeing the first symptoms.
Yeah.
And if a doctor had said to me at that time, which we all know is not going to happen, if a doctor had said, what went on with you in your life regarding sexuality and what's happening now, it would have been a whole different story for me. But
Yeah.
it was like, oh no, this has nothing to do with anything in your life. It's just a random thing
Hmm.
that happens to some women, and
Yeah.
take that cream and
Right.
and and nothing else.
For the
So
little sickness.
yeah, votre petit
Petit maladie du pot.
ah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, and nothing, I mean, he was a nice guy. He was a
I'm
good
sure.
doctor. So I'm not saying anything. It's not like, I mean,
Hmm.
again, I'm a psychologist. I wasn't trained in trauma back then.
Yeah.
I mean, now I am, but
Yeah.
um, how do I expect the doctors to be
Of
trained
course.
in
Of course.
trauma?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I mean, we're all collectively kind of getting a better understanding of it now.
Hmm.
Um, Even though I could argue like there were more spiritually kind of people, or like Reich and company, the body
Hmm. True.
psychologists.
Yeah.
They were
Absolutely.
talking about it back then. They knew everything back then. Nobody would
Hmm.
listen, and now we're
Yeah.
coming back around to it. I mean, and even before then, a lot of indigenous cultures talked
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
things, maybe not in the Western language, but I mean, they understood a lot of these
Hmm.
things and the shamanic traditions and stuff. So, I mean, in some
Uh,
sense, we're not discovering anything new. In some sense, we're just kind
hmm.
of coming back around to knowledge that's been available in other forms.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, but yeah, I think maybe for people who are listening, that sort of start to illustrate how um, lichen sclerosus, the symptoms can start to come actually after you heal a conflict, like
Mhm.
a wanting to be touched, not wanting to be touched conflict. Um, and again, mine's more complex because I had the want to be touched and not want to be touched.
Yeah.
And here I've just talked about the not want to be touched. The other one came for other reasons, which I don't really need to go into to illustrate, but I think people can maybe start to transpose that to their own experience and see if any of that sounds relevant to them.
Yeah. I think it's definitely something to get curious about for
Yeah.
sure. Um, and I think that, a lot of people don't get invitations to be curious in the first place.
No,
So,
no.
if it feels safe to you, maybe this can be your first invitation to get a little curious, to think about more than just skin itch, ointment, LS. Think a little
Right.
bit more deeply about the whole picture, the whole story. Um, and so I do want to kind of pivot the conversation a little bit and talk about healing work, the importance of healing work, and what that can look like for people. So what I'm hearing is that, symptoms almost seem like potentially a starting of the healing journey. And so what what tools, what things can people do on their healing journey to kind of support them through this, being mindful that different people are going to utilize different tools, different things are going to resonate with different people, but maybe what can people tap into, and then what what did your journey kind of look like? I know there's German new medicine involved, but what did that kind of look like for you?
Yeah, well, again, I love what you said before about that everybody's on their own healing journey. And, not everybody will need to or want to engage in the topic of trauma right now. So, like,
Mm-hmm.
again, I'll just say that because the last thing anybody with LS needs is another list of things that you have to do. And if you
Yeah.
don't do it, then you're going to suffer more.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just something to keep in mind as you're listening. These are all things that I've been doing over, like I said, really my lifetime, trying to figure out, the mind-body connection. I've been obsessed with it since I was a kid. So
Yeah.
um, not everybody's gonna care that much and be that interested
Yeah.
in digging that deep. Um, and something to keep in mind, I've seen recently, there's a meme going around that's a trauma, and it says, when do you do trauma work? And so it's like socially, like you have enough financial and social and like economic stability.
Uh-huh.
Not that the world has to be like totally in economic stability, but that you as a person, like
Yeah.
that you're not like fighting hard to just like pay the bills.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then that you have enough social support around you. You don't need everybody to, love and be taking care of you. There's 8 billion people on the planet. You don't need them all, but you need enough. And so you need kind of these other more fundamental things. And then you can really start digging into trauma work. Because one of the misunderstandings that came up around trauma work in earlier years was that everybody should just, if you have trauma, you should just go dig into it. And what was realized along the way is that Trauma's tricky. And if you just start digging into it when you don't have enough safety, then you can really kind of stir up things that you don't know how to handle, and that can be
Right.
really overwhelming. And then you can end up re-traumatizing yourself. And so I would say first, for anybody who's kind of still not in a calm nervous system place, that doesn't have, like enough money to be putting food on the table or whatever, like focus on those basics first, like work on the nervous system, work on just the financial safety, work on basic social safety first. And then, if you're feeling like, or when you're feeling like you have that, then starting to look at some of these deeper questions and like make sure you have enough space and stability, and then start asking these deeper questions. And that can just start with, like I said, kind of going, what's in my past that is linked to my sexuality, sexual suppression, um, injury to that area, like physical injury to that area. It can just be like cultural things that, I mean, my God, the culture, Western culture with its beauty standards
Oh,
and
yeah.
social media. It makes me wonder about kids these days that are like constantly on social media, girls who might be, I mean, we hear about like labiaplasty being like such a
Oh my
huge thing
gosh.
these days and stuff.
Yeah.
So it could be that nothing happened to you,
Mm-hmm.
but that the messages that you hear day in and day out about what is beauty, what do men want in a, or, as the cultural thing goes. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, so kind of just looking through your life and seeing what could that be, what could relate to this area, and then to start exploring, like, what do people do when they find out that they have these kinds of things.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I'll give some reading recommendations that where people can start to go and learn about these things. But I I kind of lay it out like that because it's a really like long process. Like I think it's a life project more like, and
Same.
that doesn't mean that you'll have symptoms for your whole life.
Mhm.
But it does mean that this is like a whole life transformation, like where you go, okay, my body is expressing something that has been in my reality. And maybe like that energy is not going to go away, but maybe that energy can be updated and I can express that energy differently, So like previously that energy was protecting something, it was
Mhm.
protecting something that felt unsafe in me. Maybe I want that to change that energy and I want to use it to, like in my case, I use it to speak out and help other people, and also for my own expression, in my own life. And so thinking about it more like a life project, like a me project. Sometimes I will you talk about it like that, where you go, yeah, this is about my whole life and like my self-development, if you want to say spiritual development. And this these symptoms are pointers to what areas in myself want to change and want to transform. And as it relates to the German New Medicine approach, it can be really simple. Like if you don't want to go too deeply into like
Mhm.
I'm really into all the spiritual development and everything
Yeah.
else. But again, some people just they're not going to want to go there. So
Mhm.
from a German New Medicine perspective, it could be a lot simpler. Like just saying to the body, you know what, I really realized that back then you had a conflict, and that like they describe it as hanging healing, when you're healing, but like for example, if you use steroid cream at that point, maybe the body doesn't finish out its
Mhm.
cycle, and so it might like then it might kind of come back and start like you might feel a conflict again, and then it can
Mhm.
trigger another flare and on and on. Again, I'm not here commenting about whether people should use steroid cream or not. I have
Yeah.
used it for years. I don't now. Who knows what I'll do in the future? It's not the point. Um, but just kind of getting the sense that, yeah, this might be getting triggered again and again. And, um, and like, you can just say to your body, like when it's getting triggered, like, I can see you got triggered by the touch, no touch, want to be touched,
Mhm.
don't want to be touched conflict, whatever it is. Um, and, but I got it this time. Like I'm working that stuff out, because it's like, if your body knows that you're handling it, then it doesn't really, I mean, it doesn't have to do these old biological programs, right?
Right.
it's just because your body was like, well, she's not handling that right now. So,
Mhm.
so now I'm gonna, I'm gonna do one of my old programs, a good old standard program, and I'm gonna make her thicker skin. But if like, so for me, I did a lot of work on having better boundaries, having
Mhm.
like clearing up a lot of the trauma from the religious indoctrination about me not really having the right to have boundaries and all of that stuff. And then I've been able to say when I've had flares to my body, well, you know what? I got this time around. Like
Mhm.
I'm handling it. So I appreciate you stepping up to help me get thicker skin, but I actually don't need it now.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's like crazy how, because I remember I used to think every time there'd be a flare, I'd be like, oh my God, it's going to be 3 months at least.
Yeah.
And then, and like, oh, and that's only if the steroid cream does its job this time. And like,
Mhm.
all of the mental gymnastics I was doing around that. And now it's like from one day to the next, I'll tell my body, yeah, you know what? Like I can sense that you're thinking you need to do the program, but like I got this.
Mhm.
Like it's not perfect. I'm not a perfect person, but I'm totally like I'm here and I got this. And it's like it just chills out like immediately. It's incredible.
Mhm.
You know?
Yeah. I
Yeah.
love that. I want to say that one thing I really appreciated that you said is that you don't have to do the trauma work. You don't have to do it now. Um, because I think it's so important that we respect people's autonomy and individual differences and the different journeys that people are on, and that people don't watch this video and think, oh no, if I don't heal my trauma now,
Mm.
I'm going to be symptomatic forever and I'm going to
Yeah.
suffer forever. Jen and I come from very different walks of life. And so, for instance, I got my lichen sclerosus in remission. I no longer have symptoms. I can have pain free sex. I have no complications. And I just do that by treating with steroids. So I think it's not about, to your point, it's not about like use steroids, don't use steroids, or this is how you should treat this. It's not, I just don't want anyone to think that there's only one way to do things.
Yeah.
Is because that can feel scary. Feels like you're backed into a corner if you're told you can only use this steroid, only clobetasol or nothing else. That
Yeah.
feels really scary. Or you have to face your trauma and you have to do the trauma work or you'll never heal. That feels scary. All
Yeah.
of these things, having one option just feels like you're backed into the corner. So I think, Jen and I, we've talked a lot before we did this conversation. And I think one thing we really want the Ellis community at large to know is that, you know, this is your path, this is your journey. We don't want to be prescriptive. We're not here to be like, you have to do the trauma work and you have to do it now, or you have to treat like X, Y, and Z. Not what it's about. You can also combine things, right? So there's nothing stopping you from using your steroid medication and also slowly exploring trauma work and trauma healing. You can combine, you can, still use emollients. There's all these ways to do it, and we really are all so incredibly unique. So it makes sense that our journeys are not all going to look the same, and I do love the prioritization of safety first,
Yeah.
before jumping into what can be very messy, very scary, and very challenging work. We want to prioritize that safety first because, to your point, what we do not want is re-traumatization. It's hard
Yeah.
enough to live with and process the fact that we have lichen sclerosus. We don't want to add additional stress on the nervous system. We do not want to re traumatize ourselves. So, slow, steady, gentle, really being in tune with yourself, where you're at, because I can't determine your safety. You can't determine my safety, right? That's
Right.
something we have to kind of decide on our own time. So I just really appreciate the highlighting of the you don't have to do this and you don't have to do this now. Maybe it's
Yeah.
in a year from now, and that's okay too. I noticed you mentioned some books and places that people can go to explore different facets. And I think that's the other thing too, is it doesn't have to be German New Medicine either for
No, for sure.
people, right? Like there's many different ways to do trauma work and trauma healing. So maybe if you can highlight some different resources, and everything that Jen mentions will be linked in the description box below. So there will be links that you can click off to.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll just build briefly on what you
Yeah.
said, because in German New Medicine as well, they're very clear that sometimes you can't solve the conflict. at the moment.
Right.
If let's say you're in a relationship that doesn't feel safe to you and
Mm,
you can't get out right now
yeah.
because of financial concerns or whatever else, that's an active conflict and you can't get
Mhm.
out. But because the most important thing is your beliefs, not exactly what's happening on the outside, um, you can change, you can always shift your beliefs. So you can always downgrade conflicts. So they'll say that sometimes you
I
can
like that.
downgrade them. Well, and I say always, but actually German medicine also just admits sometimes you just can't. I mean,
Yeah.
of course it's normal. Sometimes you just can't. You can't change your beliefs because
Mhm.
you feel maybe your beliefs are stuck and you can't change the situation at the time. And so maybe you just don't look at it. And they say, like, in those cases, then just use your steroid cream or
Yeah.
use whatever else, and don't think about this other stuff. Because
Right.
if you can't think about this other stuff in a safe space, then you're just going to create additional conflicts.
Mhm.
And then you got extra things to manage, and you don't need that. You just need to
Yeah.
like be gentle with yourself, no
Mhm.
matter how you're approaching it, So I wanted to mention that. And I want to mention, I've talked about German new medicine mostly because it's been like for me, it's been almost like this miraculous
Yeah.
process. Um, and yet, like I said at the beginning, there's caveats to the whole thing because it's a pretty Wild West territory. And so you'll see kind of some weird conspiracy theory stuff that
Mm.
people bring in about like 5G. And I mean, it can get really kind of crazy. And so, yeah,
Yeah, we're not endorsing that.
I'm not endorsing anything exactly. I'm just saying
Mhm.
that this part of German new medicine has been transformational for me. So anybody can go look German new medicine. There's tons of people out there
Mhm.
talking about it, websites and stuff. Um, for other directions to go explore, I really love the work, like I said, of Gabor Mate and the
Same.
compassionate inquiry
Yeah.
approach. It's very body based and it really helps us to it feels like a more simplified version of general therapy, of general
Yeah.
psychology, and it allows us to get in loving touch with our bodies without having to go through every little last detail of what happened in chronological order and like relive the
Mm.
whole thing. It's just very present moment based, and allows us to understand how our former conflicts affect us today and how we can shift our belief systems so that they affect us differently, and that we have more the way that Gabor explains it is that we have more response flexibility, and so we
I
can
like that.
have the symptoms today and not turn that into a threat that the rest of our lives are going to be ruined, but instead have
Yeah.
the symptoms and say, to say to a part of that part of ourselves, I'm here for you, I know it's
Mhm.
hard, it's going to be okay, that kind of thing. So his book called The Myth of Normal is
Mhm.
about our toxic culture and the trauma of the toxic culture, and
Yeah.
how we're learning about the role that trauma plays in disease. So that's a great place to go. One of the books that affected me most in this whole journey was called Cured
Okay.
by Dr. Rediger.
Mhm.
I think Rediger or Redinger. Sorry, I'm very bad with names.
That's okay.
And but you'll find it. Go
Yeah.
look for Cured, because he does this kind of wide research about spontaneous remission and spontaneous healing. And so
Mm.
it's all these cases of people who they're going to die tomorrow and then they don't, and they
Right.
go on to live really incredible lives. It was huge for me because the LS literature was like, you'll have it forever and
Mhm.
there's nothing you can do. I mean,
Which
back
is
then, but
something that is like very triggering for a lot of people. Like when I talk to
yeah,
people, that's one of the things that stands out in that like first appointment with the doctor when they say you have LS, it's usually followed by it's lifelong and there's no cure. And
yeah,
people really
yes,
hear that no cure, and that's the part that really causes so much distress. I mean, it was for me too. I latched on to
yeah,
that
me too.
really, really hard, and it really did affect me for the first probably at least 3 months. It really affected my mental health. So yeah, totally agree
Yeah,
with
me
that.
too. Yeah, and then for people like me who are predisposed already to these messages about, you're going to hell if
Mm,
you're not, like it's all kind
right.
of like you're going to be punished. That's what I mentioned before, like this belief that
Hmm.
can come back, like you're going to be punished for something and you don't even know why. And, so people can really mix the different kind of beliefs with it's forever and I'm incurable and I'm just going to continue to suffer forever. Yeah. So Cured was really helpful in that, just making me go, medicine doesn't know everything. I mean, I knew that, of course, but
Hmm.
it just made me really certain inside myself that medicine doesn't know everything. And I reasoned at that time as well. Well, I really wish that the literature would say we don't yet know if there's a
Mhm.
cure, as opposed to there is no cure.
Mhm.
Because already just in the last 10 years since I've been diagnosed, I mean, there's amazing people doing, like there's Jill Krapf and
Mhm.
company who are like doing amazing work
Yeah.
on figuring things out with lichen sclerosus. Um and yeah, and if I can, I just want to make a shout out right now to all the women who've come before, well, people, because it's not just
Mhm.
women, all the people who have come before with lichen sclerosus, before there was a public discussion about it, before they could say anything
Yes.
about it,
Yes.
before people
100%.
knew before there was the Me Too movement, because that's been
Mhm.
huge for like
Mhm.
allowing people to speak out more
Yeah.
clearly about this area of the body and things that happen to it. And yeah, I just sometimes I think of these people and I think
Same.
it's amazing that what they went through. And
And some of these people never even told their doctors, never
yeah,
got diagnosed.
I
They
know,
just
I know,
stayed on the planet and then left the planet
yeah,
holding all of that inside.
yeah.
And I can't imagine what that would be like.
Yeah, I know. So I also think of them when we're doing this stuff and we're saying, yeah, there's hope and everything. I just think of them and I just feel grateful to them for what they went through. And
Mhm.
I also feel grateful that times are changing, but I also like there's like part of me that like wants to send it back in time and say like, you're not
Right. I hear
alone,
you.
you know?
Yeah.
And yeah. So anyway, who else? Yes, there is a documentary called Heal
Mhm.
that is really powerful. And with all of these references that I'm giving, they tell you, I mean, they talk about so many experts and so many different people. And so like once you read one of these, you're going to start seeing them
Yeah.
cross-referenced, and then you see them mention this person and that person. So you can just kind of start flowing
Mhm.
into that world. And depending on your interest level, I mean, there's kind of no end. Like you could,
Yeah, I bet.
yeah, because also there's new books and new resources coming out all the time that are
Yeah.
more and more aware of the possibility for healing and remission, and I mean healing on many levels, and
Mhm.
the remission of symptoms. So one more I'll mention is The Biology of Belief from Greg Braden. Oh, I'm so bad on names. I'm sorry. But
That's
Biology of
okay.
Belief.
Anything we can correct everything in the
Okay,
description
good.
box.
Look down. Look on
They'll
the.
get the link, so it's okay. It's okay.
Wait, I think I'm mixing two people up. That's funny. But yeah, the biology belief is amazing. It really gets into the biology of what are the cells doing and
Ooh, I
how
would like that.
things change. I mean, obviously none of these people are speaking directly to LS, but it's
Mhm.
all easily transposable, to our situation
Absolutely.
wherever we're at. I think that
Perfect.
probably gives people enough
I think so
material
too.
to
Yeah.
start exploring. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. Amazing. Is there anything that, like, we'll slowly start wrapping things up, but is there anything you really wanted to highlight in this discussion that hasn't come up? Now's your opportunity to kind of bring that in if we missed something.
Well, not to put you on the spot, but I just do, while we're together with other people, I do want to say that, I mean, I think you're a game changer in this whole
Mm.
thing.
Thank you.
Because also for me, seeing your work and being able to reach out to somebody and to have
Mhm.
you say, yeah, I'm curious. Speaking of curiosity, yeah, I'm
Yeah.
curious. You were like, I don't know anything about that, but let's have a discussion and let's talk.
Mhm.
And I was like, that's so great. Like somebody there, I have somebody who knows what this thing is, who has been through some of the experiences that I have been through and is interested in having this discussion. And the way that you have shown up for the LS community has just been amazing. And I don't feel like I would have felt comfortable to share my story and to say these things publicly if it weren't for you or somebody like you. But since you're the one like you,
I am.
you, yeah. So I mean, I think I can speak for a lot of people when I just say that it's so meaningful the way that you show up, and um, you show up in a really empowered way that I think is very empowering to other people. It's very inspiring because it's like we don't have to sit in the corner and cry about this on our own, and we don't have to feel like um, I got to just keep this a secret for the rest of all time, and I don't know where to go, and I don't know what to do, and you're just like this warm sister that's out there saying, okay, here, I'll give you a hug and we're going to find a way through this. And it's, yeah, it's really great. And it, like I said, it's allowed me to be able to think these things through in a different way and share my story. I had written a blog post on your blog a while back, so people can go have a look at that. That was transformational, just to be able to put some words to the page and share and hear back, because we heard back from a lot of people and who were like, me too, me too, me too. I know this story. This happened to me too. And that was huge. So kind of to turn that point to who's listening, the social aspect of this illness is actually really interesting. It's very transformative. And I think the gifts that we get out of connecting to our LS sisters in the world is really powerful. And it's one of those things that, you know, when you have an illness, like I was saying before, you know, there's so many negatives, but also some really beautiful things that come out of it. And yeah, meeting you is one of those.
Oh, well, thank you so much. I really appreciate those kind words. And I'm so grateful that our paths crossed, because I have learned so much through you and through the relationship that we have built on the complete opposite end of the globe. We are like literally an ocean between us. But I've learned so much from you, and it's been such a humbling experience to watch your journey as well, because 2 years is a short amount of time, but it's also not, and so much has changed. And I appreciate the way that you always keep me curious and open, and I'm so grateful for that. And I'm very grateful for this conversation. And I think just to kind of end us off, I want to invite anyone listening to share anything in the comments. Share your story, share what resonated, ask questions. And I also invite you to engage with other comments too. So, you know, if somebody shares their story, engage with them as well. If something resonated, say it, send love, send hugs, just show up and witness each other with compassion, is what I would love to encourage, because there's healing in community, and this can be very isolating. And even just, I remember when Jen published her story on my blog, and just the amount of, like, again, me too's, it was like, wow, okay, like, this is not an isolated incident. It's just nobody's talking about it. And so we need people to talk, to start opening that door, and then we see just how deep this runs. So yeah.
And I would add to that, I mean, if we have medical doctors listening who are interested in this topic, I would always be open to, you know, sharing what I know about the matter, and seeing if that, you know, influences their practice and how they engage with their patients as well. I think there's a lot to be developed, you know, together through the psychological and the medical approach. And so, yeah, if you're listening and you're really interested, come find me. I mentioned at the beginning that maybe I would share my specialty. So maybe I'll do that briefly before we go. My specialty as a psychologist is working with intellectually gifted people, specifically intellectually gifted adults. So if you're one of those endlessly curious pattern, you know, big picture thinkers, you might be interested in my main work, which is at intergifted.com. And we can put that in the notes as well. And that's a place that physicians who might be interested in having a discussion could also find me.
Yeah, fantastic. Love the point about healthcare providers, researchers. This really needs to be a collaborative effort, in my opinion. We all have things that we can learn and take from each other, and I really do think we are stronger when we pool our strengths and work as a team. So amazing points. Well, thank you so much for this discussion, Jen. I can't thank you enough. I have learned so much, and I'm, again, just so grateful for you.
Thank you so much.
All right. Well, that is it for this video. I'll catch you in the next one.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.